This series contains adult language and includes content that some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. From Murder Creek Media, this is Skeptical. I'm your host, Neeli Faulkner. This is Season 1, Episode 3. If you're just now tuning into Skeptical, this is one story told week by week. So if you haven't listened to our episodes in sequential order, go back to Episode 1 and start from the beginning. Last week on Skeptical.
In the middle of that, out of the blue, he's like, oh, but Mike's not gay, neither am I. Why would he say that?
So what's the evidence that you have that would help?
That same evidence, the Rosa Davis would have evidence about the child molested that she told Sarah.
I was wondering how you knew that. So Sarah told you that Rosa knew.
Yeah.
His lawyers knew about these two police officers and didn't call them as witnesses. These lawyers didn't do much to help the young man. I was convinced at the time, and still am, that this guy was not guilty of this crime.
At the heart of Rockford, Alabama, is an intersection with no red light, only a four-way stop bustling with traffic as travelers make their way south avoiding the interstate. While it may lack the amenities of larger cities, Rockford's charm lies in its simplicity and close-knit community feel. My buddy Josh and I made our first visit there in March of 2018 with the goal of finding Mike's house. Mike's address was never listed in the trial transcripts, so we were hoping to visit the courthouse and scour property records. On television, you might see an amateur sleuth in the back room of an official government building perusing old maps. But in real life, that scene just included me and Josh asking a courthouse employee for the information, which she didn't have. We were told that property records weren't digitized until 1997, 3 years after Mike's death, so it was unlikely she could pull records in the computer. Feeling a little defeated, we were discussing plans to head home when Josh noticed a familiar name, David Law, an attorney that represented Daniel in one of his Rule 32 motions, which is a post-conviction appeal. As we walked out of the courthouse, Josh pointed out a large sign in front of a small home-turned office with David's credentials on it and suggested we pop in to see if David would talk to us. As luck would have it, David did take some time to speak with us. He politely declined my request to record our conversation, but he did talk to me a bit about what he remembered about the case. I learned that Daniel had been unsuccessful on his Rule 32 motion that David had filed, which isn't unusual. These petitions are filed by inmates all the time, and success with these motions is pretty rare. Here's a clip of me talking to Doyle Fuller, the attorney I spoke to in the last episode that was hired to help Daniel during his first appeal. I asked him what the steps were to overturn a conviction in the state of Alabama.
Any other questions? I'll be glad to try to answer.
Yeah, I just have a general question. When it comes to post-conviction relief, what are the steps that are involved in post-conviction relief? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
Well, yeah, there's several. Of course, the first and most common post-conviction remedy would be a motion for a new trial. And I see from my file here that I filed an application for leave to file a new trial motion. Because by the time I got in it, the time to file a new trial motion had expired. But when there's new counsel involved, the court can't allow the new lawyer to file an amended or a new motion for new trial, and I was allowed to do so. Filed that wasn't successful. And then about the only other really remedy, standard procedural remedy, is what's called a Rule 32 motion for relief from conviction. We filed one of those. That wasn't successful, and I believe we took an appeal from it.
After you file a Rule 32, if it's not successful, is your only option to take it, I guess, to the Alabama Supreme Court?
The only option is to appeal it from it, yeah. And that typically goes to Court of Criminal Appeals, and then you can seek review there from that ruling to the Supreme Court. Vision flush your.
I was in a bad location for cell reception, and it caused our call to get dropped. I called him back to ask a few more questions about the post-conviction process.
Hey, sorry, I don't know what happened.
Yeah. I was just saying here, there was an appeal decided without opinion in 1998. I don't think I was involved in that one, so it doesn't look like I was involved in any appeal. But I was pointing out there are 10 cases in the Court of Criminal Appeals, 2 in the Supreme Court and 8 in the Court of Criminal Appeals involving Mr. Blan. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
No, can you say that one more time?
There are 8 appellate cases, Court of Criminal Appeals, involving Danny Blan, some sort of appeal on his behalf, and 2 in the Supreme Court of Alabama, the latest being in 2013.
Oh, see, I wasn't aware of that. So that means that he's got something in there now, or that those have already been decided on?
Decided.
They decided and they were denied.
Right.
Okay.
If you didn't quite catch that, Doyle was telling me that Daniel's case has involved several appeals, 10 appeals actually. His case has been presented to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals 8 times, and to the Alabama Supreme Court twice, and each time those appeals were denied. Although numerous appeals had been filed and denied before David Law came into the picture, he said he was pretty convinced of Daniel's innocence, mostly because of the introduction of 2 alibi witnesses that were never approached by prosecutors. These 2 witnesses, Alan James and his mother, Jean Hill, claimed Daniel was with them the night Mike was killed, not in Rockford committing murder. According to Daniel, when he wasn't staying with his mom, he was a bit of a drifter, crashing on a friend's couch here and there and getting rides to work because he didn't have a car. For a few months in 1994, Daniel stayed with Alan and Jean in their apartment in Warrior, about 25 miles from where Daniel worked. Because Alan worked close to Daniel, he would drop him off at work, then head a few miles over to his own job. According to his testimony, Alan said he had picked Daniel up at Consolidated Pipe after Alan's shift ended at 5:30 p.m. Daniel had already clocked out at 5:01, so he waited a bit for Alan to pick him up, and then the 2 drove to Alan's house. Alan said once they got home, another friend of his, Tommy Hanna, arrived, and together with Daniel, they drove to Hardee's to grab dinner. Alan specifically remembered this night, July 27th, 1994, because he and Daniel had gotten into an argument on the way back from Hardee's because Alan didn't want Daniel to eat in his new truck, a Ford Ranger. Their juvenile argument lasted throughout the night, so Alan and Tommy left to go to a nearby pond to fish. When they got back around midnight, Daniel was asleep on the couch. This story was confirmed by Alan's mother, Jean, when she testified that while Alan and Tommy went fishing, her and Daniel stayed at the house watching television. She also said that Daniel left for a while around 8 p.m. with an unknown friend. When asked what this friend looked like, she could only describe him as African American, but didn't give any more information than that. Aside from the 2 alibi witnesses, Daniel's attorneys would present a copy of Daniel's time card from Consolidated Pipe to show that Daniel was at work at the time Mike was killed. This time card would be the crux of Daniel's defense at trial, and was the one piece of evidence that had me questioning the prosecution's entire case. Why would they ever have charged him if he had solid proof he was at work? I asked Mr. A, one of the jurors at Daniel's trial, about this when I had a chance to speak to him.
Now, during the trial, did you see his time card from where he was at work, where he had punched out of work? How was that explained to you during the trial?
Okay, yeah. Okay, he had a time card that said he was at work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was a guy that testified that said this place was notorious for people coming in and punching in your time card for you. You might not even show up for work on that shift. And he said that, that happened every day. So, that wasn't a whole lot of credibility in that at all.
Mr. A was referring to the testimony of Kenneth Brooks, Daniel's supervisor at Consolidated Pipe. During his trial testimony, Brooks stated it wasn't unusual for employees to clock other employees out. Back in 1994, Consolidated Pipe worked off a punch card system. Employees would pull their cards out of a pocket on the wall, then insert them into a punch that would place a timestamp on their card to indicate what time they clocked in or out. Because all the cards were there on the wall, it would have been easy for someone to pull another person's card with their own. At this point in my investigation, I was unsure about the status of the time card. The prosecution was pushing to paint a narrative that the only physical proof of Daniel's innocence was a farce, but I was hesitant to question physical evidence. If I was a suspect in a murder and you asked me for proof I was somewhere other than the crime scene, I would hope that a time card from my place of employment would suffice. After our encounter with David Law, Josh and I started towards Mike's former residence. A gentleman at David's office had told us the name of a man that was currently living there, Steve, and given us instructions on how to find the house. With the address and a scribbled map in hand, we jumped in the car and headed to the crime scene.
459.
There is a 459 junction right up here. It says we pass County Road if we get to it.
There's not a junction. It's just a turn off. There's a 27. There's 27 right there. So we're getting close.
Where do you see 27?
Right there.
That says 22.
Oh, it does? It looks like a 7.
Yes, 22 is 22.
I'm not wearing my glasses. They're in that little case right there.
After 15 minutes or so, we pulled into Mike's old driveway and drove about a quarter of a mile before we saw the house.
He would have been cutting this grass.
Yeah.
Is this it?
This is it. This is it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna stop. This is a pretty house.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get my... What about my purse? I hear a dog. I just want to get my keys real quick. Oh, it sounds like a big dog. I hope it don't attack me.
I believe you're going there.
Why not? Are you going to stay in the car?
I mean, I'll go with you.
Okay. Oh, it's a big dog. Hi. Are you Steve? Yeah. Hey, Steve. Sorry. Hey. You want to smell me? I got dogs too. No. Hey.
Y'all come on in.
We stepped out and introduced ourselves to the home's current owner, Steve, who was overwhelmingly nice considering we had just dropped in on him. We told him about our project and explained that we wanted to visit the house to get a feel for the area. He told us he bought the house from another person who had probably done some updates since Mike Bernas had lived there, but that the house still looked pretty close to what it did in 1994. I didn't get much information from Steve, but seeing the scene of the crime really helped to put the story into perspective. I understood what it would have taken to accomplish such a task, to drive to this location and make it inside the house with Mike completely unaware of anything that was about to happen. So I could see how investigators would think it was Daniel. I mean, the house is pretty well hidden. The nearest neighbor is over half a mile away on a backwoods country road not often traveled. Trees and foliage surround the property on all sides, making it relatively easy to hide and remain unseen. Daniel would have known how to get in, where to hide, and would have likely known Mike's schedule. I wanted to give Daniel the benefit of the doubt, though. Assuming he really was at work until at least 5:01 p.m., would he have even had time to get to Mike's house and commit the murder by 6 p.m. as the medical examiner claimed? I wanted to find out for myself.
What really pissed me off was the two court-appointed monkeys who wouldn't know their backside from a hole in the ground. When they were asked at, I don't know if it was a Rule 32 or a Rule 34, I'm not sure, but when they were asked at another time in the court there, and they were asked, why didn't you push about the fact that Daniel could not have gotten to the crime scene in time? Well, the one lawyer was like, Well, I did it, and there was like a 15-minute window. Well, the whole thing was he ended up being late for court for the trial at one point because he was driving the route.
I made plans to travel on a Wednesday afternoon, the same day of the week the crime had occurred. I would leave from Consolidated Pipe in Birmingham and make my way to Rockford using the fastest route that would have been available in 1994. The problem is, since 94, Interstate 65, the main road used during this trip, has been expanded several times since Mike's death, so accurately determining travel time can be difficult.
Thank you for calling the Alabama Department of Transportation. If you know your party's extension, please enter it now. Department of Transportation.
Hey, I just have a quick question. I need to talk to somebody to see if they could tell me what year I-65 was expanded.
I contacted the Alabama Department of Transportation, otherwise known as ALDOT, to see when the road expansion was completed along the portion of interstate I would be driving. They weren't able to tell me exactly when construction began, but I did find out the first expansion from 4 lanes to 6 was completed in May of 2003. If you've ever lived in Alabama, you know construction on major roadways can last up to 20 years, with I-65 being no exception. In other words, even though I-65 was only 4 lanes in 1994, it's possible there would have been major delays due to road construction, especially at 5 p.m. Taking all this information into consideration, I left Consolidated Pipe at exactly 5:01 p.m., the time Daniel clocked out from work. The people you hear with me are my friends Carla and Kaylee, who joined me on this trip.
What's going to make me mad is when I pull... 5:01. Okay. So here we go. Oh, it might help if I put it in drive. Come on. Look, there was literally no traffic the whole time we were sitting here, and now when it's time to pull out, a bunch of traffic.
Well, that lets you know that the same would have been for him as well.
That's true. Oh my gosh, every time I go to pull out, there's another one. This is a terrible spot to pull out, also.
There was significant construction being completed at the entrance to I-65 where Consolidated Pipe sits, so it added a few minutes to our trip trying to get to the interstate. The detour was so new that my GPS had trouble picking up the new route.
For some reason, it's not picking it up. Stop, people. There we go.
Make a U-turn.
Oh my,
and then
what?
Turn left.
Once we pulled out and drove about a mile to Interstate 65, we immediately hit rush hour traffic. Cars were bumper to bumper for a good portion of the trip and only got worse once we reached a construction zone.
Here we go. We're getting on there. What's the moment of truth? Well, it doesn't look that bad. Oh, it does up there. Yeah, it looks pretty bad up there.
Heavy traffic reported ahead.
When we pulled off the interstate in Clanton, it was pretty much smooth sailing for the remainder of the drive. We pulled onto the road where Mike's home was and stopped in front of his house at 6:35 p.m., 1 hour and 34 minutes from the time we left Consolidated Pipe. This means we arrived a whole half hour later than Daniel would have if he had been responsible for Mike's death. As we drove home, I thought about all the stories I had heard about belief in Daniel's innocence. I had just seen for myself that based on the timeline presented by the prosecution, Daniel would not have had time to commit the murder. I had not even considered other information that would add time to Daniel's trip, such as the amount of time it might have taken him to get from the time clock at Consolidated Pipe to his own vehicle. I would estimate a good 5 minutes for him to get to his car, get settled, and start the trip. I also didn't account for the time it would have taken Daniel to pull to a nearby road and come through what is essentially Mike's backyard, acres of wooded, hilly area, in order to remain unseen. On this trip and an earlier trip to Rockford, I had already determined the amount of time to get from the road that runs parallel to Mike's road, the one behind his house, could take at least 20 minutes, if not more, for Daniel to walk. If we added up the drive time, plus all the other times I mentioned, it would put his trip at 2 hours or more, meaning he absolutely couldn't have been the person that killed Mike, assuming his time card was legitimate. Surely, it can't be that simple. I just could not bring myself to believe that prosecutors would pursue a conviction against Daniel solely based on his relationship with Mike. If prosecutors weren't aware of the molestation allegations, and there was a possibility he had a strong alibi, what other reasons would Daniel have for killing Mike?
Mike was his only support he had, really. But another thing, too, I think Mike's mother kind of resented the fact that Mike adopted Danny, because I don't think she wanted him to have anything to do with him, because I think they were kind of from a little higher class family and didn't want to have nothing to do with somebody from the streets and whose mother was a drug addict and stuff. And I don't know. According to Danny, Mike had a little bit of money, and I think whenever in Mike's will that he was going to leave all that to Danny. And I know whenever his mother found out, I think that's whenever she really started pushing to try to tie Danny into all of this. I mean, that to me, that's the whole case right there, is them manufacturing stuff to tie him to this case so he doesn't get anything that was willed to him. And I mean, because they resented him that much and didn't like him that much. Mm-hmm. But I think that's how this whole thing got manufactured, and that's another big reason why I think he's innocent, because from the times that I've been around Danny and Mike's mother was around, you could tell that they didn't care for him, and anybody that was associated with him, they didn't care for.
Was it possible that Daniel had murdered Mike thinking he would receive death insurance benefits? It seemed to me like Greg Biggs had been trying to prove that with what little evidence he had of it. Because in the trial transcripts, Debbie, his mother, is asked about a time after the murder when she took Daniel to see an attorney, questioning her whether or not they were trying to make a claim on Mike's estate. In Debbie's response, she says, yeah, she did take Daniel to see an attorney, Lawrence King, but that it wasn't regarding the estate. She said it was because Daniel had gotten hurt and needed to speak to a lawyer. She doesn't go into any details about his injury, but when I looked up Lawrence King, I discovered he's a well-known personal injury attorney, earning over $5 million for his clients that were fired for filing a workers' compensation claim.
So Danny had been on Mike's life insurance, and so that was what was believed to be the motive, was that by killing Mike, he would have that life insurance and he could pay back what he owed. They probably made, some type of agreement, and then he'd have the rest. But it turned out that he had changed the beneficiary, but Danny didn't know that. So that was determined to be the motive for the murder.
Right. When I read in the opening statement that it was for $2,500, I thought, I know that people do really stupid things when they're on drugs, but $2,500 seems excessive for $2,500.
Yeah.
But now that you say that, that makes a lot more sense. And now that I have that report that Bobby Casper had written as for her conversations with Danny, and in there she's talking about like comments that he had made about money after Mike's death. That, well, I didn't want anything, I just wanted a picture. But, it would have been nice, or I don't remember, something like that. And so that makes a lot more sense as to a motive than $2,500 drug money.
If Daniel really did kill Mike for his insurance money, he would have been sorely disappointed once he realized that Mike had recently changed the beneficiary from Daniel to his mother, Juanita. I asked Daniel about this on our next phone call, and realized he had no idea Mike had removed him as the beneficiary.
Well, let me ask you about Mike's life insurance policy. Were you aware that he had a life insurance policy and that you were the beneficiary of that policy?
When I lived with him, yeah. He told me.
How much was the policy for?
To be honest with you, I couldn't tell you.
You don't remember if it was like $50,000, $100,000?
Well, I really couldn't tell you. You know, all he told me was he made a promise to my mom that I'd be taken care of. That's all he ever told me. They're not telling you, they're not telling you that. When I was asked what did I want from Mike, all I ever told them was, hey, just give me the stuff I gave him. All that other stuff, I can care less about.
No, the investigator put that in her notes about that you said you only wanted a picture.
Yeah, all the stuff I wanted was the stuff that I gave him. That meant something to me. You know what I'm talking about? Like in school, I painted him a picture. I wanted that. You know what I'm talking about? That's the picture that they're talking about that I wanted. Something I painted. I gave him he collects, beer mugs, you know the mugs you put in your freezer and they get cold, you pour beer in them?
Yeah.
I gave him one for his birthday. I wanted that. That's all the stuff I ever wanted.
A beer stein.
You know, yeah, because something I bought him, you know what I'm talking about? It didn't mean a hell, excuse my language, it didn't mean a hell of beans to them, but it meant everything to me.
Right. But you never asked for any money or anything after he died?
Okay, no well.
This motive, insurance money, was very believable. I didn't understand why Greg Biggs did not use this in his opening statement or really talk about it much at the trial, but later I realized he may not have mentioned it because of the fact that Daniel never actually received any money. How could Biggs have proved that Daniel didn't know he was the beneficiary? Something I heard from Mr. A further solidified my thoughts on why Biggs never brought this up.
He just done it, man. He done it. And let me tell you what really got me. See, there was some special investigators there after the deliberation and the verdict. They came to me. I was actually the foreman of the jury. And they came to me, man, they just hugged me, and they said, man, we just knew he was going to get away. But, I mean, they had so much more evidence that pointed out that he actually done it, but some of it wasn't admissible to court. So they knew he done it, but, you know, it might have been something that the judge didn't allow. But the investigators and the special investigators, they had already pointed that out to me afterwards. So, you know, what happened should have happened. It should have went down just like it did.
I'm going to tell you something now that's going to change this story drastically. All the information I've given you has been presented as accurately as I could give it to you, but there's something I left out, and it's big. The story I've presented up until now has been an optical illusion, like those photos that hung as home decor in the early 90s, where you just stare at it for a long time and all of a sudden you see something you hadn't seen before. Like the image has shifted, and although you're seeing the same figures, you're looking at it in a new light. All those pieces that didn't make sense? Well, they might make sense now, but only if you believe this next version of the story. I want to introduce you to another major character by the name of Tony Quince. He's an important character, so if you're taking notes, make sure to write his name down. But why is Tony Quince so important to this story? Because he was also convicted of the murder of Michael Bernas. Next week on Skeptical.
Tony, I'm Agent Thornton. This is Officer Anderson. The time is 12:05 a.m. Today's date, Wednesday, March 22nd, 1995. At this time, I'm advise you of your rights.
Can you tell me how you knew Tony Quince? Like, how did you meet him?
My first time ever meeting Tony Quince.
Uh-huh.
I was sitting in the still been a courtroom, right? Alright, and you know how they get the people that's been convicted of crimes and stuff, they make them sit up there with the jury there, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's my first time ever meeting Tony Quince.
Place you under arrest for the capital murder of Michael Bernas.
Skeptical is a production of Murder Creek Media. It's created, written, and narrated by me. Our associate producers are Emily Christie, Tony Forbes, Camry Council, Lauren Powell, and Chantrace Martin. Special thanks to Bailey Dollar and Clarissa Rambo. You can find out more about us and our work by visiting murdercreekmedia.com. If you're hungry for more, consider joining our premium subscription on Spotify. Unlock exclusive access to unaired content, including extended audio interviews and host commentary, offering a deeper dive into the cases that grip your curiosity. You can also join the conversation online by searching our social handle, SkepticalPod. If you like this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Leaving a review helps us grow and improve, making sure we can continue to bring you the content you crave. Every rating, comment, and share helps others discover our show. Remember, every voice matters in the pursuit of justice. Keep questioning, keep advocating, and together we can make a difference.